If you're honest, the weight of dementia caregiving sometimes feels too big, and you're wondering if you're supposed to carry it without collapsing under it. How many of you have felt like that the weight of caregiving is just too much, and you have no idea how a Christian is supposed to keep going without breaking? If you're honest, you know that this is something most of us struggle with at some point, some of us more than others. And if you are here today feeling heavily burdened by caregiving, today's episode is designed to give you a different perspective. Hey, Christian caregiver, welcome to Dementia Caregiver Support for Christians, the podcast for Bible-believing Christians who are carrying heavy burdens, struggling through the difficult conversations, making hard decisions and second-guessing them, and dealing with their own emotions of guilt, resentment, or discouragement. On this podcast, we tackle these 4 problems: the burdens, the conversations, the decisions, and the emotions. And today is about heavy burdens and gaining perspective. If you've been listening for a while, you know that until December 31st, you can still join our Foundations membership for lifetime access for only $97. That's a one-time payment of less than $100 for lifetime access. Inside, you'll gain clarity, you'll gain support, and you'll gain a community, a place where you can grow with like-minded Christian caregivers. After December 31st, it will be $97 a year. Still very affordable, but why not hop in and join now at a lifetime investment at the link in the show notes or thinkdifferentdementia.com/join. So with that in mind, let's talk about what happens when caregiving feels way too big and how a simple shift in perspective can change the way you carry this role. Many of you guys may know, or you may not, but recently I had a wonderful experience, a wonderful gift to go on a dementia-supported cruise. And something that I walked away from this cruise thinking is looking at how it changed my perspective. And so that's what we're going to look at today. When we arrived on the deck, when we arrived at the harbor, when you're standing next to one of these cruise ships, it feels huge. It feels massive. You're small in comparison to this 13, 14, 15-story floating city with all of the amenities that you can imagine, food and entertainment and swimming pools and all of this, cabins and varying different restaurants and just everything. But when you stand next to it, it is huge. And I remember looking up at it and then, looking back at the photos and seeing how big this ship is when people are standing next to it. Now I want you to fast forward a little bit, and you are now in the middle of the ocean. And right at the time we were going on this cruise was when Melissa was doing its rounds through the Caribbean, and we actually went through the Panama Canal. And so I remember vividly being on the ship and all of a sudden getting this bird's eye view of this huge ship in the middle of the ocean. And it looks like a tiny little ant. And it is so small in the middle of the ocean with this massive hurricane barreling down into the area where we're supposed to sail into, and thinking to myself that I'm on this ship in the middle of God's ocean, and if that ship goes down, there's nothing to stand on, there's nothing to cling to. The realization that, there's very little between me and eternity came upon me while I was standing there reflecting that Hurricane Melissa was not super far from us in the Caribbean. And then several days later, we had the same ship, which was in the middle of the ocean, that I felt insignificant when standing next to it, in the middle of the Panama Canal, where you look out of the window and you see 2 feet between you, that massive ship, and the canal. And yet again, my perspective shifted. And so I wanted to share this particular story with you today related to how we can, as Christian caregivers, carry our burdens without collapsing by changing our perspective. And so I know you guys know that I love my points. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at this through 4 different points. The first one, what feels huge up close is not huge to God. The second one, storms expose our fear, but not God's limits. The third thing is narrow places and spaces require guidance, not perfection. So narrow places and spaces require guidance and not perfection. And perspective is a part of faithful stewardship. So let's look at today's episode in those 4 different points. So what feels huge up close to us is not huge to God. God sees everything. So I want you to picture, we know God upholds the world in his hands. And so God sees the entire ocean of our lives. What feels overwhelming and all-consuming to us up close is really so small and so insignificant when fully known through his lens and through his hands. So like I said, at the dock, this cruise ship felt gigantic. It's a floating city. Everything you can ever need is right there. But when you stand next to it, you feel like an ant. And so when we're standing in our caregiving journey, caregiving feels overwhelming, feels like we are insignificant, and everything that we have to do is so overwhelming, so large. And the paperwork, the appointments, the conflict, it's right in front of us, and it blocks out our view sometimes of everything else. But in that moment, God has shown me through giving me perspective that I'm seeing sometimes what's going on in my life from the perspective of in front of that ship, where all you can see is the ship. And when you look at it from God's perspective, it looks very different. So Psalm 46 verses 1-3 says, and Psalm 46 is one of my favorite Psalms in the entire Bible for a variety of reasons. But in this particular section, it says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give away, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. God is our refuge and our strength. And for Psalm 46, verse 10, which is one of my other favorite verses in the Bible, it says, cease striving. Cease striving or be still and know that I am God. So in perspective, what feels huge to us up close because we're living it, it is right there in front of our face, is not large to God. Caregivers like you and I, we live right up against the side of the ship. We are thinking of or considering what happens with the next thing, the next phone call, the next decision, the next burden. And sometimes it can feel like it is the only thing in the world. This helps you remember that when you zoom out and look at it from God's perspective, you can see that even though it's big to you and I, it is not big to the Lord. He is not overwhelmed. I want you to ask yourself to think through the lens of eternity. How is the Lord actually seeing this specific situation, this specific problem in your life, and how is he using it to form you into who you need to be? When we have a biblical view of God, a biblical view of God's sovereignty and his majesty, he spoke creation into being. He spoke. He didn't do anything. He just spoke words. When we look at things through God's lens, through his sovereignty, through his majesty, it allows us to see our problems in the right perspective. It doesn't minimize that here on earth, we are going to suffer. We are going to suffer as a believer. We're going to suffer because we live in a sin-cursed world. And those things are facts. But it wasn't supposed to be that way. And we, of all people, have hope because we have hope of eternity, because God sent his only begotten Son to redeem you and I from our sin-cursed world that we inflicted on ourselves through Adam, right? And so recognize that nothing is bigger than God. And God holds this season in his hands as well. So the second thing that we're going to look at is storms do expose our fear, but not God's limits. So when we are in a crisis, we recognize, or it reveals to us, how small and fragile we are. But they never show any weakness in God. Storm shows us our fear, but they don't change his power or his care for us in the middle of a storm. So as we were navigating this journey with a full realization that there was a hurricane, Hurricane Melissa, barreling through that region, my perspective shifted, and that huge ship suddenly did not feel very big at all. And I became extremely aware, like to my core, that if something went wrong out there, there was no land, there was no backup. And I was joking when I told somebody else the story. I'm like, we'd be fish food. You can't touch the bottom of the ocean when you're in the middle of the ocean. And as far as we could see, there was no land. And then I zoomed out and I saw this ship from that perspective. And it reminded me that when we are in the middle of a crisis, right? And when we are feeling vulnerable, when we are in these times and seasons of our caregiving journey, things like falls or ER visits or a sudden change, or if we have financial vulnerability or family conflict or any of those things, I saw and I recognized that those can feel to a very large extent like a storm in your caregiving journey, like a storm that is coming from nowhere and seems outside of anything that you can control. But God, right? But God controls the storms. God shows us his power in the storm. He spoke. Jesus spoke in the story when he was crossing the sea and he was asleep and his disciples became afraid and they woke him up and said, Lord, are you not, something to the effect of, aren't you afraid that we're going to perish? And he literally spoke, Jesus spoke the storm into submission. He is part of the creator God. He is one of the triune God. He was always there and he holds creation in his hands and he upholds us. Psalm 107 verse 28 through 30 says, Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. And Isaiah also says in chapter 43, verses 1 and 2, But now thus says the Lord, He who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. He's called us by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame will not consume you. So even in the middle of the storm, even in the middle of this ocean, even if Hurricane Melissa had taken that ship out in the middle of that situation, the Lord was 100% still in control. And even if I had passed away during that period of time, the flame would not have consumed me because I belong to him. And so when something goes wrong in your caregiving, I know it is easy, very easy to think or feel that God is not with you, to wonder why things are getting worse, to question God's providence, to believe or feel like he may be punishing you. Remember, storms don't tell us that God has changed. They show us, because God never changes. God never changes. Storms show us how much we need him, how much we are 100% all the time reliant on God's good grace and God's upholding of this entire world. Yes, our fear can be real. It's a reality when you're facing a storm like Hurricane Melissa to be afraid, but it doesn't show that God is not in this. God is in the storm, and it's our invitation to go to him, not to run away from him. So as you're struggling maybe in your caregiving journey, remember to run to God, not run away from him. Because when you understand, when you know and trust that you serve a holy and good and loving God and Father, creator of the whole universe, and that He is good and that He is our Alpha and our Omega. We trust that a good and kind and loving God has our best interests in mind. When you look at this through the lens of eternity, what is the purpose of suffering? What is the purpose of a storm in your life? The purpose of suffering and the purpose of a storm in your life is to make you, dear listener, more like Jesus Christ, holy and set apart. It is not to damage you. It is not to harm you in any way. It is to form you into the image of your Redeemer and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so we should expect storms and suffering in a fallen world. And we need to anchor ourselves in the Lord, who is the upholder of this. And acknowledge your fear. Tell Him you're afraid. Tell Him you're frustrated. Tell Him you're hurting. Lamenting is a real thing. It is absolutely a part of what we as a Christian should do. And this is a topic for another episode, but there is a difference between lamenting and venting. And I came up with that the other day. As I was driving with my husband, and I'm like, I think that would be a very good episode. What is the difference between lamenting and venting? So hold on to your britches because that one will be coming. So the third thing that we're going to look at is narrow places and spaces require guidance, not perfection. God never demands that we navigate situations without necessarily making errors. He understands that we are human. He understands that we are fallible. He understands that we are going to make mistakes. And He invites us in those tight, high-stakes situations to lean on Him and to seek His wisdom and to use wise counsel and walk with Him. So when we were actually navigating the Panama Canal specifically, they had done a really good lead up and wind up to telling us all of the things that were related to that, the tugboats, and there's a separate captain and how much training they have to have because the Panama Canal links the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, and there is a tremendous economic impact if a ship breaks the canal because our travel and our commerce is highly dependent on ships being able to navigate through the Panama Canal. And as we were going through the Panama Canal, I felt the tension. Literally took a photo of 2 feet between the one wall and the other wall in this massive ship. And it's being guided through this Panama Canal. So when I stood next to it, it was huge. When we were in the middle of the ocean, it was small. And now we're standing in the Panama Canal and there's no room for error. There's no room for error. And I became very aware of what could happen if this ship actually hit one of the walls. And I recognized that that ship was not doing it alone. There were multiple pilots, tugboats, technology, a massive team guiding this ship through that very narrow space. And it struck me that so many caregivers feel all alone in trying to navigate their Panama Canal of caregiving because they haven't put together people around them. They have no margin in time or money or sleep or your emotions. And we try to do this all by ourselves, like putting a ship through the Panama Canal with no help. James 1 verse 5, which is another one of my very, very favorite verses, and mostly because it's a verse that my grandmother gave me. I still have this in my Bible in her handwriting, and she's passed away about 10 years. And it says this, James 1 verse 5, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. So the Lord asks you to ask him for wisdom, and the Lord gives you wisdom, and sometimes he gives you wisdom through means. And I'll never forget this. We had a sermon once about several months ago, and I think this is in 2 Samuel or in Samuel, Chronicles or Samuel, about the people who, when David was fleeing from Absalom, and some of the people went to a woman, and there was a woman at the well, and she hid them inside the well for the people who were hunting them. And the pastor actually told us that the Lord, they could have just stood there and the Lord would have protected them if it was his will to do that. But the Lord gave them means, and the means was hiding in the well. And so the Lord puts means around you as you're navigating this dementia caregiving journey. And my hope and prayer is that this podcast has become a means for you to have a place and a space where we are talking about this particular problem through a Christian worldview. And I pray this every single day. I pray for families who are navigating this very difficult chapter, this very difficult season of their life, recognizing that this is not outside God's control. He is in control. Psalm 32 verse 8 says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. God is in the midst of this. God gives us exactly what we need when we need it, and not a minute too soon. So frequently, I know caregivers believe that we are the ones keeping this caregiving afloat, that we're the only one that can navigate this for the person, and that we believe sometimes that if we make a wrong decision, that things will not work out the way they should, or if we decide about moving or setting boundaries with family or whatever the thing is, that we're so caught up in what I call the Panama Canal, that we're so focused on trying to navigate this by ourselves without hitting the sides of the canal. And I want you to remember, God does not ask you to do this alone. He is leading you through this. He gives you permission to look for help, to ask questions, to use resources, to lean on community instead of trying to do this by yourself. There is significant wisdom in being in community. And we are, if you look at the Bible, if you read your Bible, we are constantly pulled into community. And something that we do not think about, I know I didn't often think about it, but God is in community with himself. He is in perfect community with himself. There's no conflict between the Trinity. And He gives us community. He gives us community in families, in marriages, in churches, and we are to be around other people and guided by other people, and we are not to navigate this journey alone. God gives us wisdom and protects us through wise counselors, wise church, wise support groups, and we are not to be doing this by ourselves. And so if you are alone and if you don't have anybody who can navigate this with you, I do invite you to join the Lifetime community. It's $97. I couldn't make it any less affordable than that. If you join now until the end of the year, you will join for a lifetime at the foundation's membership. So just think about it. If you're alone, join me there. We have about 25 people already in the community. I would love to get to 50 by the end of the year. I would love to get to 100 by the end of the year, but that's not what it's about. It's about serving you. It's about serving you right where you are in the hard places and hard spaces in this journey. So the last point is perspective. Having perspective is a part of faithful stewardship. So when we see caregiving through the lens of eternity, through God's lens, right? Not our lens, through God's lens, not just our personal emotions, not our frustrations, our fatigue, but as a part of becoming more like Christ, because that is the outcome of being a Christian, right? We as Christians should never wake up tomorrow and be the exact same person as we were yesterday. We should be more holy every day. Sometimes we're not. I know I have moments like that myself, but our job as a believer is to be growing more like Christ. And our caregiving season is for us to steward well. And our perspective it's not a luxury to gain perspective on this. It's part of being obedience. So when I was on this cruise, I had 3 different perspectives of the same experience in one time. Being small next to it, standing on the dock, being tiny on top of this in the middle of God's ocean, and then being very afraid and tense in the canal where one wrong move could have jeopardized a lot. Nothing changed. The ship didn't change. The ship was the same. What changed was me and my vantage point. And so when we are living in caregiving and we are only living with the perspective of the distance, I'm standing on the dock and I see this huge ship pressed up against it, living in the crisis, we will burn out. And the Lord used this specific opportunity to be on this dementia-supported cruise to invite me into looking at things through a different posture, through a different perspective, to stand back with Him and ask myself some questions like, what is true? How do I look at this? What do I take away from this particular experience, right? And so Colossians 3 verses 1 and 2 says, if then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not the things that are on the earth. And then another very well-known passage from Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. So when caregivers forget to see their journey through a stewardship lens, we are doing more. We are trying more. We have more tasks. We have more research. We have more things that we are struggling through. And that is not stewardship. Stewardship is not necessarily doing everything, but seeing everything through God's lens and what is yours to steward, so that you can make calmer and wise decisions because you zoom out with God and not just look right at the ship in front of you in the dock. Stewardship is our calling to be faithful. It's up to us to faithfully steward 3 things that the Lord gives you. Your skills. You do need actual skills to be an effective caregiver. You need to steward the resources, which also includes financial, but not only. It's your time, your effort, your energy, all of that. And to steward yourself. You are to steward yourself through this whole journey. So you need to be able to zoom out and look and see what's ours to carry, what is things that we can maybe delegate, and be obedient and keep your eye on Christ. So, key takeaways for today. Sometimes what feels massive up close in caregiving, I shouldn't say sometimes, what feels massive up close in caregiving is not massive to God. He sees the whole picture when we only see the next thing in front of us. Caregiving storms can expose our fears, but they do not expose weakness in God or any gap in His care for you. He is there. The narrow canal seasons of caregiving are not tests for us to be perfect. They're invitations for us to seek God's wisdom and to accept His guidance. And then learning to see your caregiving through God's perspective is a part of faithful stewardship, and it opens the door to more peace and not more pressure. So, where are you in your caregiving right now? Where do you feel pressed up against the side of the ship? Overwhelmed, afraid, or out of margin? And what might change if you paused and asked, Lord, help me see this in the way that you see this? I want you to ask the Lord that this week. Help me see this journey, this season, the way you see it. Not the way I see it, but the way you see it. And yet again, right at the end of this episode, I would invite you, if you're listening to this before December the 31st, I invite you to come into the DigniCare Foundation's membership. It is specifically only for Christian caregivers. And right now, it's $97 for a lifetime membership, lifetime access. In January, the same support will be $97 a year. But if you join now, it will lock you in access for your entire caregiving journey. Join us at thinkdifferentdementia.com/join. The link is also in the show notes. This community is where we gently, biblically, practically walk through the hard burdens, the hard conversations, the hard decisions, the hard emotions of caregiving together, so you don't have to keep figuring it out on your own. And as I end all of these episodes, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and I will see you in our next episode.